we always talk about the strength of the Stanford students and how diverse the body is, how smart everyone is, but we never really talk about the context of Stanford students working with each other. Our impact has compounding effects, not just additive effects.
Hello, I'm Lindsay Aiken, and I manage career services at the Department of Management Science and Engineering at Stanford University. Welcome to MS&E Stories and Voices, Graduating Student Profiles. It seems hard to believe, but this year's graduating bachelor's class are the ones who started their Stanford careers online back in September 2020 at the height of the COVID pandemic. Many of us who'd been at Stanford for any amount of time back then, particularly in student-facing roles, were concerned about how that would impact their social experience, since we know from our own experiences and from watching Reunion Homecoming each year just how seminal our university friends are. So I'm really looking forward today to talking with Nathan Lamb about how he found his friendship groups when his class year was finally able to come onto campus for their sophomore years in September 2021. Because the strong friendships that he's formed have come about through his dedication to being really involved and active. Nathan, thank you so much for being here. Can you tell us about what it was like coming onto campus so much later than usual and playing catch up on all of this relationship building?
Yeah, I think I want to start by just saying thank you so much for highlighting these stories and just being able to talk about my experience at Stanford. 2020 was such an interesting year. And I say this for almost all the Stanford students I've been with. I was living in New Jersey while taking all these classes at Stanford. I think for me, one of the major things that kept me really close to other people were these different Zoom calls that I'd had, and a lot of them were hosted through different clubs and student organizations. And so originally, I actually, ironically, didn't plan to join a lot of these student organizations because I was really involved in high school. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to try exploring other activities, maybe more sports, maybe more dorm life. But then I found so many of my friends and so many people who I talked to on like a daily basis through the socials that a lot of the student organizations hosted. And so even coming onto campus, these were some of the first people that I met with. And so that one COVID year actually did set up a lot of the social life that I've had at Stanford, but also the way that I've been involved. Maybe I'm just really overly optimistic, but I do think there's some silver linings in that first COVID year. I think that made a lot of Stanford students really open-minded coming into sophomore year. And so even as sophomores, they kind of felt like freshmen again. And so coming onto campus, I think those first couple of quarters back, we were overly social. And it was so great meeting everyone, being in those groups and talking to people for the first time. And that was some of the most exciting weeks that I've had at Stanford. Honestly, I think that open-mindedness carries on to even senior year, where because we realized that we missed out on that first year, we missed out on orientation, we're still ready to openly meet other people, even this late into our Stanford career.
So that's awesome because these friendships carry forward. It sounds like you had a lot of club involvement there. So tell us more about which clubs you ended up being involved in and to what extent.
Over my time at Stanford, I was really involved in 3 different clubs. I was the co-president of ACES, which is the Global Entrepreneurship Society. I was the president of SPBA, which is the Stanford Pre-Business Association. And I was also the current co-president of Tau Beta Pi, which is the Engineering Honor Society.
Well, that is a lot of involvement. That sounds busy.
Oh, for sure. But I really do think like these 3 organizations, while they take up a lot of my free time, they're really fulfilling in the sense that I'm able to develop myself professionally and still have these social parts of communication and collaboration with my fellow peers at Stanford. Actually, I think I'm a huge component for community. And even before I became president of these clubs, I was actually the social chair, like the community chair for ACES and SPBA, and even in Tau Beta Pi, I do most of the work on the social side of things. And I think after COVID, there's been this change where a lot of the pre-professional organizations are turning more into just collaborative societies. And having that chance to meet other people has been a really pivotal point in my journey.
Yeah. Our relationships and our networks, just personally and professionally, super important for us. And so as we think then of, your social life is falling into place, your attention could turn then to what you wanted your major to be and what you wanted your future to look like. So obviously you landed with us here in MSNE and we're delighted about that too. So what was it that attracted you into the MSNE major?
Yeah, for sure. And I think this is another funny story. I think my Stanford journey in a whole is just a lot of happy little accidents that lead me to where I am today. So I actually came from a health vocational high school. So this was a super small high school in New Jersey, roughly 60 students, and we all studied on the direct healthcare track. So if you imagine like EMT, medical terminology, coming into Stanford, I definitely flirted with the idea of being pre-med. And I was actually intended to go bioengineering. But a lot of my experiences at even my high school and even at Stanford have revolved around people and leading different organizations. And so I always joked with some of my friends and I was telling them, I was like, oh, if there's a people engineering major, that's the major that I would want to be. And so I think MS&E is one of those majors that encompass people engineering, to be involved with other people, to create these communities for your friends while still maintaining like this broad interdisciplinary engineering understanding that lets you collaborate with engineers and different technology ventures. I think there's a couple of pivotal points in my journey to declaring MS&E. And I always tell people the first one was MS&E 180, and that's organizational behaviors with Professor Eisenhart. This one MS&E class where I realized that MS&E is the major that I want to go into because I thought organizational behavior is something that is so broadly applicable to everyday life,
It
to
really is,
your
yeah.
friend groups, to your dorm life. And for me, being involved in these organizations meant actually actively learning from these classes and applying it into my everyday life. There's so many great classes for this. MS&E 183, Leadership in Action with Professor Sino. I really thought that it's so interesting that the projects were so open-ended. They're just like, oh, do any leadership project, run any social movement. And so each time I got one of these assignments, I would bring that into one of the clubs that I was a part of and actively implement it. I would even do like these experiments where, as co-president of ASIS, I would implement like a particular type of leadership style. And then as president of SPBA, I'd do something differently based off of the reading and then see how they compare. And so I think that was a super life-changing point, just taking these classes and actually actively applying it to the clubs I was a part of.
Yeah, that experiential learning is just always so valuable, I feel like.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And I think like speaking about a lot of the projects at MS&E, I had a lot of these great, like even senior project, I had a lot of these like great teams where informed a lot of the things I was interested in, such as like product management, but also on the other sides towards like consulting and just figuring out how to use business and engineering in that intersection together.
So then speaking of your senior project, you were in a really tight team. But what I remember from that day watching Senior Project was your team came up just so like, well prepared. You had 100 slides that felt like, and clearly gelled really well. So could you tell us a little bit about your project, how that came about, how on earth it was that you had 100 slides?
Yeah, this is arguably the best like project team that I've ever worked with in my life.
Oh, wow. That's a big statement.
It really is, but I think the people were what made it that special. Of course, all of us were MS&E majors, but even before that, we were all pretty close friends. And this is another happy little incident, but actually coming into MS&E 120, since I did not really know anyone during the COVID year, I sat next to just people that I met coincidentally in some of my virtual classes.
Okay, so this was going back to your sophomore year, you did 120.
Right. And so I sat next to someone called Manish and someone called Jacob, and I introduced myself. I was like, wow, Manish and I actually lived in the same dorm. And I knew Jacob concurrently from taking MS&E 111 over Zoom. Right. And so we formed this ragtag team, this trio, this Three Musketeers. And that project to me was the first project that we worked on in the MS&E core. And somehow by coincidence, we landed in the same MS&E classes, class after class, quarter after quarter. And so
is that truly by coincidence? So
it's truly by coincidence. We landed in the same class after class. And for maybe 80 to even 90% of this class projects I've worked on in MS&E, I've worked with Jacob and Manish. We've worked on a class project maybe every quarter since freshman spring, all the way to even senior winter. So I was really close with Jacob and Manish, and we had this really great working dynamic. We had this really good open communication. And then Alex was actually one of our mutual friends.
Okay.
And so when he came onto this group, I was really excited to work with the three of them. And I think Alex, if anything, he became this additional motivator to push our group to work even further, especially since he had this super in-depth knowledge of Excel that worked really well in our project. And we were all super passionate about the project. Our project was for this nonprofit in Mauritius called Foodwise, and they wanted us to calculate a social return of investment, also calculating for all the intangible benefits. So thinking about the sustainability efforts, the impacts on like DEI efforts and so on. And so
it's very subjective and hard to measure in any sort of numerical way.
It really was. I think the group did a really great job with tackling just this uncertainty by being overly prepared to every meeting that we came up to. We all had a pretty high standard for ourselves and the group itself. And so coming into the meeting, the second meeting of the week, the third meeting of the week, we were already finishing milestones 2, 3, 4 weeks ahead of the assignment due dates. And we would meet on like the weekends for 4 to 6 hours at a time. And working with them just really motivated me to work even harder. And so I truly told my other friends, I was like, wow, every time I come from this meeting, I'm excited to do more work. One of the things that we mentioned about the ending deliverables, you already mentioned that it was roughly 100 slides, but even our written report was 60 pages long. And that just talked only about like the deliverables that we did. And even within the presentation, since it's only 10 minutes, there's so many things that we didn't get to talk about. There's so many things that we worked on. And the reason why we were so prepared for that presentation was even before the final pitch, where we reached out to all the MS&E advisors for senior project. For example, Professor Sweeney, Professor Easley, Professor Pelliger. And so we came in and we asked if we could pitch our presentation beforehand. They had some of the hardest questions that we've ever seen for these slides. And so each time we iterated through their questions was what made the appendix for that presentation.
It was like every single slide you'd ever created in that one deck.
We also presented a lot of these slides at like every one of the weekly meetings with our client. And so that built like a really strong like slide deck that we had at the end.
That's awesome. It sounds like it became this virtuous cycle. You were all doing good work and you sort of inspired and very subconsciously pushed each other to do even more, do it even better than was going to happen anyway.
Yeah, for sure. And we wanted to just really use all of our MS&E experience and produce something that we could look back on fondly and have like this great story to talk about like what we learned in MS&E. And we definitely have to give a shout out to Professor Rita, who was such like a great advisor and honestly like one of the nicest people I've met at MS&E.
She is. She's great. I know she loves senior project class. It's so fun to see everybody coming together and using what they've learned over the course of doing the degree. Was there something in particular that like why this project above others that were options for you kind of appealed?
The project kind of rang a bell with all 4 of our interests. And so tying a little bit of like the student organizations before, it's actually really funny because I was a part of ACES, which is the Global Entrepreneurship Society. And then Jacob was a part of BASIS, which is the other entrepreneurship society. And then Manish was a part of the Social Entrepreneurship Society. And then Alex was, of course, in Stanford Finance. And I think that really highlights all the particular interests that we had going into the project. Working for an NGO in East Africa really shows what you can do with like entrepreneurship, with like a global perspective, with the social understanding of entrepreneurship, but also with an understanding that finance could be used to promote social good. And so this idea of like social return on investment, while it had a lot of uncertainty, I think it has this play on impact investing that we were all kind of interested about.
Yeah, that's fascinating. It's something you feel like we're definitely seeing a lot from your generation is this interest in social good, social impact, tech for good, investing for good, a lot of these themes coming through, which is just really wonderful to see. And it leads to a lot of great work that people can be passionate about. Your excitement for this is so clear. And clearly the love of teamwork also is clearly something that's really important for you. So with all of that combined, how are you taking this into the future as you graduate and move on from Stanford?
Right. So after Stanford, I'm going to work at McKinsey and their SF office. Coming into Stanford, I really had this vision of using business to help others. A lot of that was thinking about how we could spread business to communities who are not as engaged in business, or even people who don't necessarily think that they need to use business in their daily projects. Going back to what you were mentioning before, there's always this idea of what good we can bring into the world. And actually, it's interesting because I was a Peak Fellow at SDVP, and Peak Fellow being principled entrepreneurship. And even within those discussions, we always talk about how we can spread entrepreneurial education, but also the idea of innovation to other countries globally as through like ACES, but also within our own local communities. Post Stanford, I think going to McKinsey, where a career in consulting will help me improve my like business acumen. I think that also ties back into what I can actually do with consulting and advising, and how I can bring that to potentially Stanford startups or just other projects around Stanford, and how we can use these projects to actually solve some of like the global world problems.
The grand challenges that are out there. Just want to make a quick note on the recent name change with the Peak Fellowships. This is now the X-Fund Ethics Fellowship. So we're almost out of time, but I did want to give you another note of congratulations because I know that you were recognized with the Terman Award this year, and I just wanted to give you another opportunity for another shout out for the high school teacher who you invited to come to campus for your recognition for that Terman Award.
Right. Thank you so much for allowing me to express gratitude, because I think gratitude is one of the things that we don't often give enough, especially to professors and teachers, especially since they have such a big importance in the way that your life plays out. Actually, it's quite funny because when I got the award, I asked some of my high school friends, I was like, wow, there's so many great teachers at our school. I honestly truly believe that vocational schools have some of the best teachers. And so I asked them, who should I invite? Kind of unanimously, we all talked about Nicole Levecki, who was our history teacher, but she also was our HOSA advisor, HOSA being this pre-professional healthcare organization. She is just someone who's so openly positive, so happy, so extroverted, and she brought a lot of smiles to the students' faces. I know that sounds really cliche, but she was also there for us. We went to Disneyland together. We went to Capitol Hill to pitch for more funding for HOSA. We went to these state conferences to Texas. And so I think that shows just the kind of dedication a great teacher could put towards building their students. And I think while I have the chance now, I also want to take the space to thank a lot of my MS&E professors and just all the Stanford professors I've had. Some of the professors I've talked about today, like Professor Eisenhart, when we were hosting this event for Tau Beta Pi, highlighting great engineering professors, she saw that I was hosting it, and she actually came like a day after her surgery, and she came just to say hi and drop by. And she couldn't really stay for the event because the light was not inducive to her surgery. But I think that simple act, or not even a simple act, I think that act itself was so touching to me, for a Stanford professor to come back for a student in her sophomore class. Really shows that MS&E is like such a rich department, and that MS&E was like a great choice for me. And then of course, also have to have like a big shout out for Rita, who was our senior project advisor, but she was also my undergraduate advisor, my graduate advisor, my research advisor, and like my professor for class. And she's also really big part of SCVP. So I think this like changed my perspective on the way that engineering and business works. So there's so many great professors I want to highlight, and if I were to highlight all of them, it would probably take like another.
We'd have an hour-long episode. Thank you so much for that. You're right. The gratitude, as we think, I'm sure we can all look back and highlight particular teachers that have had a huge impact on our lives. And so, yeah, taking the time just to recognize them.
Since this is an MS&E podcast, and I know they're going to be listening to it, I also want to shout out Manish, Alex, and Jacob for their amazing support and all the work that we did.
They're strong friends for life.
For sure, for sure.
And so then, You're actually giving me the perfect segue here into kind of my final three questions that I always like to wrap up with. What's your advice for those who are, maybe newly declared or thinking about MS&E that they might not have already heard?
I actually get this question a lot. I talk a lot with the underclassmen in the student org that I'm in, and they always ask me like, "Oh, what do you recommend for MS&E students?" And I always have one answer, and it's really to meet other MS&E students. So whatever your first MS&E class is, sit down and introduce yourself to the person in front of you, person to the left of you, right, back, and so forth. I think looking even at the senior projects, there's so many groups in senior project where everyone was really close with each other. And so I think MS&E being such a project heavy course, and even just like in the future where there's a lot of projects that need to be tackled to solve these global problems, having this network of other close friends that you can work with actually completely changes the way that people approach MS&E, and even changes the way that like teams are formed and teams are built to solve these problems.
It's awesome. You're making me so hopeful that some of these big global problems we're going to be able to tackle well and tackle strongly and start having impact in the world.
Maybe I'm overly optimistic once again, but I do believe that while the world has a lot of problems, seeing like the pure talent at Stanford, and even like around the world, like we can truly solve any global problems if we work together. And I know that sounds really cliche, but we always talk about the strength of the Stanford students and how diverse the body is, how smart everyone is. But we never really talk about the context of Stanford students working with each other. Our impact has compounding effects, not just additive effects.
No, that is such an important perspective. I truly believe working with you guys day in, day out, it's one of my favorite things for sure, is seeing how you all come together and think about things in fresh, new ways and bring so much energy to it all. And so that then also brings us then into life wisdom. And so I'm curious, what is your life maxim?
Yeah, so I maybe this is another happy little incident, but I watched this one video in high school, and this is like a quote that I'll still say to this day. And that's the idea that life is just today repeated. I really like this quote because it breaks down this big idea of how can you actually have a great, fulfilling life to the individual days. Because life is all just about days. There's yesterday, there's today, there's tomorrow. And so breaking that down, you can see on a granular level, in order to have a great life, you just have to have a great today. So thinking about what habits you want to form, what projects you want to work on, what people that you want to meet. And this has even led me to, I think, be more optimistic in the way that I live my life. I just realized that if I want to be happy in my life, I need to start by being happy today in the present.
That is such a solid way of looking at things, I think. And then finally, 2 books and a podcast. One of them that might be MS&E adjacent, a book that's just for fun, and then a podcast that you maybe find particularly inspirational.
I'll actually choose 2 books that I read at Stanford, and also perhaps a newsletter that another Stanford alum recommended to me, because the podcasts I listen to are very specific to my interests. So for example, I listen to like daily Cantonese lessons. So the first book is Tiny Habits by BJ Fogg, who is the founder of the Stanford Design Habits Lab. I actually read this book in D Health, which is a class by the D School. And the reason why I choose it is because actually following the principles, you understand that any big habit can be broken down to these tiny habits. And so, for example, if you want to work out every day, you start by just doing 1 push-up a day. There's a lot of things I do now because of this book. The second Stanford book is actually Startup with You. And this is actually what I read for MS&E 272, which is global entrepreneurial marketing. But the reason why I recommend Startup with You is because, like I mentioned before, MS&E majors, they're really entrepreneurial. They're really driven by innovation. And so thinking about your own life as the startup that you can build and that you can work towards, I think makes it seem a lot more doable. It makes it seem a lot more actionable and even a lot more quantifiable in some sense. But I think the way that it contextualizes how you can build your career as a startup, I think that is super interesting. And then the newsletter that I recommend, this one is also a little cliche, but it's called TLDR. I think it's also really prevalent to MS&E majors, since MS&E has this idea of end engineering. So going into any technology management role, or even just other things that you can do with an MS&E major, I think there should be like a good high level understanding of what's happening in the engineering world. It's one thing to take classes like CS. It's one thing to take classes in the engineering realm. I think it's another to consume it on a daily basis to understand what innovation is happening in the world.
Thank you so much for being here today. This has been really fun, really entertaining. Just congratulations on your upcoming commencement, and I'm sure we're going to be watching your career.
Right now, thank you so much for the opportunity to share a little bit about my experiences.
Award update. I doubt anyone will be surprised by this, given how Nathan has talked about their team and project in this episode, but I'm delighted to share that he, Manish, Jacob, and Alex won the MS&E Senior Project Award, which is announced at our commencement ceremony each year. Congratulations to all of them. Thank you for listening to this episode of MS&E Stories and Voices, Graduating Student Profiles. This episode was produced and edited by me, Lindsay Aiken, with editing support from Jim Fabry. Our music was composed and performed by Catherine Barron, MS&E Masters Class of 2023. Please be sure to subscribe to us on Spotify or whichever platform you're listening on. And check out our website at msne.stanford.edu. That's msande.stanford.edu. Thank you again, and we'll see you next time.